Ambassador, ISIS is making more gains in Iraq. There's furious fighting taking place. They're on the verge now of taking Ramadi. They're moving all over the country. If you were President Bolton or Secretary of State Bolton, what would you do to destroy, cripple, and defeat ISIS?
Yeah. Well, look, let's be clear that we face in the Middle East multiple threats to the United States. From Iran, from its support for terrorism, nuclear weapons program, Al-Qaeda, terrorist groups, and in particular ISIS. And what's happened, any new president will inherit the legacy that Obama's going to leave, which is that we've moved from having a crisis in Libya, having a crisis in Yemen, having a crisis in Iraq, to the entire region descending into chaos. So a new president will face multiple problems, each of which helps make the other worse. But ISIS is destroying the structure of states in the Middle East that's lasted almost 100 years since the Treaty of Versailles and the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. They are creating a new country out of what used to be Iraq and what used to be Syria. I've said, and I continue to believe, that Iraq is never going to exist as a country again. The Kurds are functionally independent. They are, by the way, by and large, friends of the United States. We should be arming them directly. That's not what the Obama administration is doing. They want to send the arms through the Baghdad government, which is a proxy for Iran. I think Syria has ceased to exist as a country. And so the issue, there's going to be a new Sunni state basically out of eastern Syria and western Iraq. And the question is going to be, will it be a jihadist radical state, or will it just be a nice old authoritarian state, or maybe a democracy, but an authoritarian but moderate Sunni state? Because if ISIS continues to consolidate its control, it will be a magnet for radicals and terrorists and jihadis from America and Europe. We've already seen that start to happen. And just so it's clear, right now, ISIS controls territory equal to a country the size of Great Britain. It's not a small speck of land. A lot of it's desert, that's for sure. You wouldn't want to live there. But they've got oil reserves. They have a national currency. They've set up a central bank. They have a national budget, which means they're a step ahead of us. They have declared themselves a caliphate, and while any guy with a flag and a patch of ground can do that, they're gaining adherents all over the world. Boko Haram in Nigeria is as bloodthirsty a group as you've ever seen, has declared their allegiance. Now, these things can come and go, but the fact is ISIS and its leadership know what they want. They stormed out of Syria into Iraq and took Fallujah in January of last year. Fallujah, a place where hundreds of Americans died over the course of the war. And it's now, having liberated it from Saddam Hussein, it's now in the hands of these fundamentalist Islamicists. They took Mosul in June and just swept the Iraqi army away. Our advisors who are in there now privately tell people that they're shocked at what happened to the Iraqi army. After all the equipment we gave them, all the training we gave them, they're incompetent. They just retook Tikrit. It's another place where Americans fought and died, but only because of our air attacks, not because of their own capabilities on the ground. And even as Tikrit was falling to the Iraqi government, ISIS was advancing elsewhere, bringing more of the radicals in Syria under their control. So I give you this by way of background because you can't turn this on and off like a light switch. I think the American objective should be to destroy the ISIS state. I think that's the only way that we can be safe from terrorist attacks in this country and throughout Europe. I think to do that, we ought to bring all of the Arab states and Turkey together. They ought to supply a large percentage of the ground force that goes in against ISIS, but they need American leadership. They're not capable of doing it on their own. And I know a lot of people say, look, it's their problem, it's in their part of the world, let them handle it. And they do have a big responsibility, which is why they ought to have the biggest chunk of the troops involved. But it's not enough to say they need to do it, because implicitly what you're saying is our security would rest on their performance. Well, what if their performance is inadequate, as it has been so far? Are we going to say we're indifferent to our security because they don't perform? We're at risk as well. And what we have seen in the Middle East is that the lack of American leadership leads to further chaos. We can't allow that region to come unglued, to have it dominated by Iran or by a terrorist operation like ISIS. Our economy, the Europeans' economy, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, all rest on what comes out of the Middle East in terms of oil and natural gas. It is a tragedy we are at the point that we're at now. It stems directly from Obama's decision to pull American and other coalition forces out in 2011. This is the point Emma Skye is making in her new book. And so we're going to have to pay a cost that a prudent president would have prevented and we wouldn't have had to pay. But make no mistake, if you don't want more Boston Marathon bombings, more shootings at Fort Hood, more attacks in this country, ISIS has to be eradicated. And what we should have done after they took Mosul in June is followed Winston Churchill's advice about the Russian Revolution. Churchill said back at the time that Britain and others should have strangled Bolshevism in its cradle. And that's what we should have done to ISIS, because every day that they're able to consolidate control, it's going to make it more difficult to eradicate them. Now, some have said, on the left in particular, great, this is an opportunity to be allies with Iran against a common enemy. You know, it's delusional. Ultimately, I would predict if we don't deal with ISIS, ISIS and the government of Iran will reach a way of living together against the common enemy, us. So I would not strengthen the government of Baghdad. I wouldn't rely on Iran. They're not our allies. Remember the saying from the Middle East, less known than another one, but the saying is, I against my brother and I against our cousin, all of us against the foreigner. And that means us. So we've got to clean this up. There's absolutely no doubt that American leadership is central to this. I wish I didn't have to say that, but our safety ultimately depends on marshaling the Arabs and the Turks to do the job that we haven't done over the past year and a half.